Sachas Megillah Daf Chaf Beis. We begin with the last few lines in Daf Chaf Aleph. The Gemara has three main topics to discuss. We're in the subject of Kriyas Torah, the rules and the halachos of laning from the Torah. The Gemara's first question is going to be, what do you do when you cannot fit all the aliyahs which you need to lane into the number of psukim you have in accordance with the rules of where you're allowed to stop an aliyah? There will be two examples of that, and the Gemara will have the same solution for each. Next, the Gemara will discuss how many aliyahs do you have on a fast day, on a public fast day. Does that count as a regular weekday, or does that count as a day when you're not supposed to do malacha? And the third, along the second discussion, we'll have mentioned that there was an incident that happened where Rav went to a town and he didn't say tachton and everybody else did, and the Gemara is going to want to know why. The Gemara will offer a number of halachos to explain that, and some other relevant halachos. So the Gemara begins discussing Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh, we need to lane 4 aliyos, and the laning of a Rosh Chodesh has 3 parshios, 3 paragraphs. The first one has 8 psukim, the next has 2 psukim, and the third has 5 psukim. So how are we going to divide this up into 4 aliyos? Now the rule is you cannot stop a laning, you can't stop an aliyah within 3 psukim of the end of a parsha, of a break between one paragraph and the next. You also can't start a laning within 3 psukim, as we shall see later in the Gemara. Now, the reason for that is that we're afraid that somebody's going to come to shul late or leave early, will think that you laned one of the aliyahs was less than 3 psukim. An aliyah has to be a minimum of 3 psukim. If you'll start within 3 psukim of the preceding parsha, the person will think that the aliyah before had less than 3 psukim in it. And if you're going to end an aliyah, well, that would be if he comes late and he sees that you started here, he won't know how long the preceding aliyah was. He'll assume that it was only to the beginning of the parsha, which would be less than 3 psukim. Also, if you end an aliyah within 3 psukim at the end of a parsha, the person's going to think that the next aliyah will go, he may leave early, and he won't see what happens with the next aliyah, and he'll assume that the next aliyah will go from the end of this aliyah to the end of the parsha, which would be less than 3 psukim, and that, of course, you cannot have. So the Gemara says, so what are you going to do here? You have 3 parshios, 8 psukim, 2 psukim, and 5 psukim. You have to divide it up into 4. So if you're going to divide up the first aliyah as 3-3, then you're going to be left with only 2 psukim to the end of that paragraph. That you're not allowed to do. So the only thing you can do is divide it up. The first parsha could be 4 and 4. The problem then is what are you going to do with the next aliyah? The third aliyah would have to be the 2 psukim from the next parsha plus 1, 2, or 3 from the third parsha. So if it's 1 or 2, that's no good because you're not allowed to stop an aliyah within 2 psukim of the end of the preceding parsha, and here you would be within 1 or 2 psukim. If you're going to do 3 aliyahs, 3 psukim from the last parsha, you'll end up having 2 and 3. That'll be a 5 pasuk aliyah. The problem is then your remaining aliyah is only going to have 2 psukim left to it, and you need to have at least 3. So what are you supposed to do here? So the Gemara says this question was asked from Ula by Rav to Rava. And he says, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you about a similar question which was raised, and I can tell you what the discussion over there was. This question is one we had in Maseches Tainis. We know that when the Kahana brought Korbanos, there were special Yisraelim who were on rotation to do a special order of tefillos and fasting. For those Korbanos, they represented the rest of Klal Yisrael, and they also read from the Torah. So what they read depended on the day of the week. The first day, they read the first day of creation and the second day of creation. And we're supposed to get 3 aliyahs out of it. Now, the first day of creation is 5 psukim long. The second day of creation is 3 psukim long. So how do you get 3 psukim? How do you get 3 aliyahs, that is, out of 5 psukim and 3 psukim? And there's a paragraph break at the end of the first 5 psukim. So the second parsha, the second paragraph is 3 psukim, that'll be your third aliyah. Fine, no problem. But how are you going to divide the first 5 psukim, the first parsha, into 2 aliyahs? You only have 5 psukim there, you can only divide it as 3 and 2, when you cannot stop within 2 psukim of a parsha, and you can't have an aliyah less than 2 psukim. So the Gemara has 2 versions of what you're supposed to do. It's a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Rav says you read the middle pasuk twice. You read the first 3 psukim as the first aliyah. You stop within 2 psukim at the end of the parsha, even though you're not supposed to, because you're stuck. There's nothing else you can do here. And then the second aliyah begins from the second pasuk, the end of the second pasuk, that is, and you read pasuk 3, 4, and 5. You start within 2 psukim of the beginning of the Torah. You're not supposed to do that, but you have no other option over here, and therefore that's what you're supposed to do. Shmuel says, no, you take the middle pasuk and you cut it in half. The first aliyah reads 2.5 psukim, and the second aliyah reads 2.5 psukim. So I think Gemara says, how could Shmuel say that? Don't we know that you're not supposed to cut psukim in half? If Moshe Rabbeinu didn't stop there, you're not allowed to stop there. Matter of fact, the Gemara quotes the Rabbi Hanania, the expert in teaching psukim, when he used to teach his talmidim, he used to teach children. He got a heter from Rabbi Hanina Hagodol to stop a pasuk in the middle because it was too hard for the children to learn. But other than that, there was no heter. So Shmuel says, well, here, this is also a situation in which there is nothing you could do. Just like there was no other way to teach the kids. Over here, also, there's no other way to get these 2 aliyahs into 5 psukim, and that's why you're allowed to do it. Now, the reason why Shmuel didn't want to reread the second pasuk is because of the reason we said earlier. He didn't want to start an aliyah within 2 psukim of the aliyah before. He didn't want to stop an aliyah within 2 psukim of the end of the parsha, which comes afterwards. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa which seems to be a problematic on both Rav and Shmuel. So the brisa says a number of halachas. First of all, it says if you are reading an aliyah which is 6 psukim long, and you want to divide it into 2 aliyahs, so you read 3 and 3, no problem. If you have an aliyah which is less than 6 psukim long, let's say it's 5 psukim long, you want to divide it into 2 aliyahs. So you're not supposed to. The Tanakama, who speaks first, says you're not supposed to. But if the first person got up and he read 3 psukim and then he stopped, so the next person has only 2 psukim left to go. So here we have a machlokas between the Tanakama and the Yesh Omrim, the second opinion as to what you're supposed to do. The Tanakama says you should read those 2 psukim plus 1 more pasuk, and the Yesh Omrim says you should read those 2 psukim plus an additional 3 psukim from the next paragraph, because you shouldn't read less than 1 pasuk from a paragraph. You can't stop your aliyah within 1 pasuk of the beginning of the parsha that follows. So again, what's happening is as follows. Everybody agrees you should not end your aliyah within 3 psukim of the parsha that's following you. You shouldn't have left less than 3 psukim to the end of the parsha after you stop your aliyah. As to whether or not you're allowed to stop your aliyah having passed through only 3 psukim since the beginning of your parsha, meaning less than 3 psukim behind you, that's where you have a machlokas. The Tanakhama says you're allowed to do that, and therefore you could read 2 psukim and then 1 pasuk from the next parsha. And the Yesh Omrim says you can only read 2 psukim and 3 psukim from the next parsha. You cannot stop after having read only 2 psukim. So the Gemara says neither of these fit with Rav and Shmuel, because Rav and Shmuel have other solutions. Rav and Shmuel would say you could either read the middle pasuk twice, or you should split the middle pasuk in half. So the Gemara says it's not a kasha. Rav and Shmuel are talking about a situation where you can't read further. You only have this amount of psukim you can read. You can only read from day 1 and day 2 of creation as part of the laning for the day. Here you can go further, and therefore you have another solution, and that's why they don't say to use either of their 2 solutions with our only solutions you do when you don't have anything else. They just say you can read further, so you can read further. So now what's the halacha here? So the Gemara says, Yeshua ben Levi says the halacha is like the Yesh Omrim. That is to say, you should read 2 psukim and then 3 more psukim. You should not stop within 3 psukim of the beginning of the parsha that you just read through. You shouldn't have less than 2 psukim. So the reason for that would be that somebody who comes in late would see that you've stopped within 2 psukim. They'll think that the laning before was less than 2 psukim. So Gemara says the halacha is like that. We are afraid that people will come late. So then the Gemara says, and in addition, the halacha is that you also shouldn't stop with less than 3 psukim remaining in the parsha, which was the halacha that the Tanakama had said that you can't. The first person who lanes shouldn't stop. He shouldn't. If it's only 5 psukim in the parsha, he shouldn't stop after 3 because there's only 2 psukim left. If somebody who leaves early will think that the next aliyah is only going to read the next 2 psukim. So the Gemara says, well, obviously, if the halacha is like the Yesh Omrim, obviously this second halacha is true, because the Yesh Omrim was the machmir here. He's the one who went stringently. He said you can't stop if you are only 2 psukim into a parsha. So certainly he'll agree with the Tanakama's first halacha. The Tanakama was the lenient one, and he said you can't stop with 2 psukim remaining in the parsha. The Yesh Omrim will certainly agree that that's true. If the Tanakama who's lenient says that, then certainly the Yesh Omrim who's strict is going to say that. So it's not necessarily. It could be that the Yesh Omrim says that's not such a concern, because we are afraid of people coming late. People come late all the time. But people leaving early doesn't happen so often, therefore I'm not afraid that someone's going to leave early. So therefore he would be machmer and say you cannot end in aliyah only 2 psukim deep into the parsha, but he would say that you can stop with only 2 psukim remaining because I don't have to worry about somebody's going to leave early. Now, the Tanakama, who didn't hold that way, he said the other way. He said that you can stop. He said that you shouldn't stop with 2 psukim remaining. That's because he's afraid that somebody's going to leave. So he is afraid that somebody will leave, but he's only afraid for that. He's not worried about you stopping only 2 psukim deep, because the only way that that's going to be a problem is if somebody comes late and he walks in and he sees that you stop 2 psukim in, and he'll think that the person who had the aliyah before you leaned only 2 psukim from the beginning of the parsha until here. So the Gemara explains that somebody who comes into shul late could always ask what's going on, right? Why did we start over here? But somebody who leaves early, even though it's not so common, somebody who leaves early he's no one to ask. He doesn't know why you stopped laning here. He's going to assume that the person after you will say, will read only 2 psukim, and therefore he's not going to get corrected. Okay, so that's that machlokes. The Gemara now goes back to what is the halacha in these situations where we have only 5 psukim, you need to break into 2 aliyahs. So Gemara says that Rav Yosef says, he asked what the halacha is, and they sent him that the halacha is you read the middle pasuk twice. Like Shmuel, Rav said, you read the middle pasuk twice, and that is what we do as far as Rosh Chodesh is concerned. We split the first 5 aliyahs, the first parsha, into 2 aliyahs, and we read the middle pasuk twice. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to another subject, and that's the topic of a fast day. So we had seen in our Mishnah, it had said that regular weekdays have only 3 aliyahs because people need to rush to work. If you have a Chol Hamoed or Rosh Chodesh, which are somewhat restricted in their ability to work, but people can still work on those days, then you do 4 aliyahs. Yom Tov is a level higher than that, you do 5 aliyahs. Yom Kippur you do 6 aliyahs, and on Shabbos you do 7 aliyahs. So the Gemara says, what about fast day? Fast day was left out. Fast day falls somewhere between a regular weekday and a Chol Hamoed or a Rosh Chodesh, because the fast day you're also not really supposed to work. Women were given the present not to, there are the gift that women were given not to work, that's on Rosh Chodesh. So you are allowed to work on Rosh Chodesh, but women were given a bit of a Yom Tov not to work. But on fast days, some places have the minhag to work and some places have the minhag not to work. It is technically permitted to work. So the Gemara says, so where do fast days fit in over here? So the Gemara says, well, maybe I'll tell you, fast days are like fast days are like Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed. And the reason is because the rule the Mishnah says is that 4 aliyahs are in any day where you're allowed to work, but there is a tfilas musaf. That's when we do 4. So the Gemara says, well, a fast day also kind of has a musaf. It doesn't have a musaf carbon, but it does have an extra tefillah. You add anenu in the Shemona Esrei. On the other hand, it's not really a musaf, so maybe it doesn't fit in that category. Now, our Mishnah doesn't really help us either way because it only lists weekdays amongst the days that have 3 aliyahs, and it only lists Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed amongst the days that have 4 aliyahs, so Tainus we can't prove anything from that about a fast day because it falls between those two either way. You can't make a diak there. So Gemara wants to learn the halacha from a story. Gemara says that Rav went to Bavel on a fast day, on a public fast day, and he laned from the Torah, he got an aliyah. And the story goes there that he said the bracha at the beginning of the aliyah. He did not say the bracha at the end of the aliyah. And something which we'll discuss later, everyone else in the shul said tachnun with nefilas apayim, putting the head down, and he did not. He did not say tachnun, he did not put his head down. So the Gemara now says, what is the reason that Rav did not say a bracha at the end of his aliyah? Rav is a Yisrael, so he must have gotten the last aliyah. So if he didn't say a bracha at the end of his aliyah, it must be that he got the 3rd aliyah, and there was another aliyah after him, and we're going over here in a situation where you only said a bracha in the beginning and not at the end, and therefore Rav didn't say the bracha at the end. Only the last aliyah says the end bracha, and that's why Rav didn't say aliyah. So you see, that was a fast day, and Rav's 3rd aliyah was not the last aliyah, there must be a 4th aliyah afterwards. So Gemara says, no, it was not the situation. Rav got the first aliyah. Now, Rav is not a Kohen. How could he get the first aliyah? So the Gemara says a very chashuv Talmud Chacham could be yielded the first aliyah by the Kohanim of the place. The Gemara records that Rav Huna was given the Kohen aliyah, even though he wasn't a Kohen. When he came to the town of Rav Ami and Rav Asi in Eretz Yisrael, they gave him, even though they were chashuv Kohanim, they gave him to have the Kohen's aliyah because they were subservient to him, and therefore they honored with him. So when Rav came here, so Rav for sure would be given the honor of the first aliyah. So the Gemara says that can't be because Rav always honored Shmuel, and when Rav came to Bavel, Shmuel was there. Shmuel was a Kohen, so why would Rav take the Kohen aliyah away from Shmuel? Rav always honored Shmuel. So the Gemara says, no, Shmuel really humbled himself before Rav, and therefore Shmuel gave the aliyah to Rav. Rav was greater. Rav also showed kavod to Shmuel, that's when Shmuel was there. But here Shmuel wasn't there, and therefore he didn't have a problem taking the aliyah. So therefore Rav really took the Kohen aliyah, and that's why he didn't say a bracha afterwards, because it wasn't the last aliyah. Versus, and I'll prove it to you, because why did he say the first bracha? Why did he say the bracha at the beginning of his aliyah? only the first aliyah says a bracha at the beginning of the aliyah. So if you understand that Rav said the bracha at the beginning of his aliyah, obviously he was having the first aliyah, and therefore it doesn't prove it. It doesn't prove that there were 4 aliyahs. The reason why he didn't say the bracha at the end of his aliyah is because it wasn't the last aliyah. He only did aliyah number 1. There were still 2 and 3 afterwards, and there was really only 3, even though it was a fast day. It doesn't prove anything. So I'll tell you a different reason that he said a bracha before, and that's because he is dealing at a time when everybody said both brachas at the beginning and the end. That's why he said the bracha before. You can ask me, why didn't he say the bracha afterwards? Simple. He didn't say the bracha afterwards because now there was no concern that somebody was going to leave early and think that you don't say a bracha at the end of laning. Because when Rav is sitting there in shul, nobody's going to leave early. So if everybody will stay to the end, and they'll see that the last O is going to say the bracha at the end. Therefore, there was no reason to say the bracha at the end. However, people could still come late, and therefore Rav would have to say the bracha before. So it really could be that Rav said the bracha before and not after, even though he didn't get the first aliyah. So there's no proof necessarily that Rav got the first aliyah, but there's also no proof the other way that Rav got the third aliyah, and there's no proof that a fast day has 4 aliyahs. So the Gemara says, let's look at the Mishnah. That is, let's look at a different Mishnah, which clearly says what halacha is. It says, here's the rule. Any day where people are going to work, and therefore you have to worry about if the laning takes too long, you're disturbing them from their work. For example, a fast day or a Tisha B'Av. Any day like that, you read only 3 aliyahs. Any day which people aren't going to work, because there's limitations on the work, like, for example, Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, then you read 4 aliyahs. So here it says clearly that fast day is considered like a weekday, and you say only 3 aliyahs. So Gemara has a kasha. Gemara says, Rav Ashi asks, but if you look at our Mishnah gave a rule. Our Mishnah said that any day that has Musaf and is not a Yom Tov, there you have 4 aliyahs. Why are we giving a rule here? Must be including something in the list that has 4 aliyahs. We must be including fast days. What else could it be? Fast days and Tisha B'Av. So Gemara says, but that can't be true, because then if our Mishnah holds that a fast day has 4 aliyahs, if our Mishnah, like Rav Ashi wants to suggest, has 4 aliyahs on a fast day, and he argues on this other Mishnah, the problem then is that there's a brisa that gives us 2 opinions, and our Mishnah wouldn't fit with either of them. That brisa has a machagas between Rav Yossi and the Chachamim. But what happens when a Tisha B'Av is on a weekday? So the brisa there says that if Tisha B'Av is on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, is different than it's on a Monday or a Thursday. If it's on a Wednesday or a Thursday, you're always going to have 3 aliyahs, and then the last aliyah will also be the maftir. If it's on a Monday or a Thursday, up to now was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. If it's on a Monday or a Thursday, then you have a machlokas. So Tanna Kama says you have 3 aliyahs and then a 4th person is the maftir, and Rav Yossi says you have 3 aliyahs and the last person is the maftir, just like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Now our Mishnah wouldn't fit with either, because our Mishnah says you always have 4 aliyahs besides the maftir. So therefore, our Mishnah can possibly hold like what you're saying. Our Mishnah has to hold that there are only 3 aliyahs. You have a kasha. It says a rule. It says this is the rule, and usually when it says zihakal, this is the rule, it's including something. In this situation, the Mishnah is not including anything. All it is telling you how to remember the different aliyahs. It's giving you a setup that whatever level a day is on, it's 1 more aliyah than the day below it. So a regular weekday will have 3 aliyahs. That includes a fast day. A day that has Musaf will have 4 aliyahs. A day that has Isser Malacha will have 5 aliyahs. Yom Kippur, which is a level higher than Yom Tov, that has Isser Malacha because it has Kares. If somebody violates it, that has 6 aliyahs. And Shabbos, which is Skila, that has 7 aliyahs. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the story with Rav. We had said that Rav didn't say Tachni, didn't do Nefilas Apayim. So Gemara wants to know why not. So Gemara offers a number of approaches over here. The Gemara's first approach is that there was a stone floor there, and the halacha is, you see a brisa, you're not allowed to bow down, you're not allowed to lie down on a stone floor unless it's in the base of Megillah. It says, Evan Maskas Leisitim Ba'artzcha Mishtachavo Soleha. You're not allowed to bow down on a stone floor, lie down flat as part of a Shishtachava unless it's in the base of Mikdash. And that's halacha which Ula explains the brisa in the base of Mikdash. You're allowed to do it, everywhere else you're not allowed to do it. So therefore Rav didn't do it. The Gemara says that was true, so why did everybody else do it? The Gemara says everybody else was in front of Rav, they were on a different surface. So the Gemara says, so why didn't Rav go to where they were so that he could say Tachlan over there? Versus he didn't want to be matrech them to stand up for him. If they saw him coming, they would all stand up for him. He didn't want to bother them, and therefore he stayed away. He stayed on the surface on which he was. That's Gemara's first answer. Gemara's second answer is that Rav, when he did Tachlan, always did Pishut Yadayim Hargalayim. He stretched out his arms and legs. That's usher to do on the floor. That's usher to do on any floor. And therefore Rav did not want to do Tachlan. So Gemara says, well, why didn't he this time not do Pishut Yadayim Hargalayim? So that he should be able to hear. So the Gemara says, because the Gemara here is working with the halacha that Pishut Yadayim Raglayim is asar on a stone floor, and that's why he didn't do it here. And the entire area was all stone floored. So Rav couldn't do Tachlan because he had to do Pishut Yadayim Raglayim because that was his minig. Everyone else could because they didn't do Pishut Yadayim Raglayim, and that's mutter even on a stone floor. So the Gemara says, why didn't Rav just not do Pishut Yadayim Raglayim here? He found himself on a stone floor. So the Gemara answers, no, Rav didn't want to change his minig. He always did Pishut Yadayim Raglayim. He'd rather do nothing than change his minig. The Gemara's third answer is that Rav was an Adam Chashav, and we have the halacha that Rav Elazar says an Adam Chashav is not allowed to say Nefilas Apayim, not to say Tachnon, unless he knows he's going to be answered, unless he knows that his level of merit is the level of Yeshua ben Nun, who is always going to be answered, like it says in the pasuk in Sefer Yeshua, V'yom Hashem Yeshua kum lach. Hashem said to Yeshua, stand up. Why are you lying on the floor? Yeshua is always going to be answered. So if you're on that level, then you can answer. Okay, now the Gemara concludes with a brisa that discusses the different types of bowing and what they are. So kida means you bring your face to the ground, you balance yourself and bring only your face to the ground. Gemara says you press your thumb into the ground to hold yourself up. That's kida, and you see that from the pasuk says v'tikod b'sheva apayim eretz. So tikod, kida, is to bow, to bring the apayim to the eretz, the face to the ground. What's kriya? Kriya means to be on the knees, like it says michroya al birkov, pasuk in Malachim. So that's kriya. Ishtachava is lying on the floor with the arms and legs outstretched. Pishut Yadayim Raglayim, like it says, Havo Navo Ani V'imcha V'achacha Lehishtachavos L'cha Arza. Yaakov said, are we all going to do Hishtachava Arza flat on the ground? And those are the four kinds. Now the Gemara says that Levi showed Kida to Rebbe, and because of that he became lame. He limped, he injured himself forever after. So the Gemara says, is that why he became lame? We have a Gemara elsewhere that says he became lame because he spoke disrespectfully to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his tefillah, and he was being smile for rain, and he said, why did you go up to Shemayim and forget about us here on earth? So that disrespectfulness made him become lame. So the Gemara says that was what caused it spiritually, but the way it happened was that he showed this kida, and then when he tried to get up, it was too much strain on his back legs, and that caused him to be injured. Now the Gemara says that Abaye and Rava, whenever they did Nefilas Apayim Tachnon, they didn't do fully on the face, they did it on the side in a kind of partial leaning.